A very warm welcome to IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 13. I'm Ritwika Gupta. As the world gathers for COP30 in Brazil a decade after the Paris Agreement, the urgency to move from climate ambition to tangible action has never been greater. Tonight, we bring you a special episode focused on COP30, decoding key conversations shaping this landmark summit. And on the show tonight, I have the privilege to have a conversation with Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, CEEW, and Special Envoy for COP30 South Asia, to explore how India is emerging as a proactive leader in the Global South. We now have Dr. Ghosh with us today, who is joining us straight from Brazil. Thank you so much for taking the time out to speak to us, Dr. Ghosh.
Thank you so much, Ritwika, for having me on your show.
Now, Dr. Ghosh, COP30 marks a decade since the Paris Agreement and the first full turn of its cycle. As the world gathers in Belém, what would you say are the biggest conversations shaping this COP?
The most important conversation is, are we still committed as a global community in combating one of the gravest crises that humanity has ever faced? And I think despite the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement, the rest of the world is still demonstrating that commitment. But what's also framing this conversation is the general state of the world we are in. There are geopolitical tensions, there are geo-economic tensions, there are disruptions in supply chains, there are trade barriers, there is worry about the cost of finance. So I think this is serving as a backdrop to how we think about climate action. And I think in that context, it is even more important that we recognize that many countries are not just committing to do more, but many countries are demonstrating what they've already done. India achieved its target of 50% of installed capacity of electricity coming from non-fossil sources earlier this year in July, 5 years ahead of target. Brazil's new commitment on climate action aims to reduce net emissions by 59 to 67% by 2035. China is accounting for about 60% of all new renewable energy capacity that will be deployed worldwide by 2030. So it's showing that the large emerging economies are actually delivering on climate action despite these disruptions that we are all buffeted by. And it's a commitment to a different form of multilateralism, which is not just about negotiating deals, but getting things done.
Sure. So how do you see the agenda at COP30 shifting from previous years? Is there a tangible difference in tone, in urgency or participation compared to, say, COP28 in Dubai?
It's interesting that you framed it this way, because the COP28 that happened in Dubai 2 years ago came out with this statement that all fossil fuels would eventually have to, be removed. And is recognizing that, climate change was caused by the burning of fossil fuels. That is important. But it also came out with a statement around the tripling of renewable energy and the doubling of energy efficiency targets worldwide. What very few people remember, but it's important to remember, that those targets originally were stated in the Leaders' Declaration under India's G20 presidency, the Leaders' Summit that happened just prior to COP28. So that was important 2 years ago. Last year, the main thing that came out of the Baku COP was this commitment that the new collective quantified goal for climate finance would be $300 billion, upwards of the $100 billion that was earlier promised. but short of what was asked for. What COP30 does is it takes all of this and it's kind of what I would say it's the end of the beginning and the beginning of the next stage. The end of the beginning, meaning the first 10 years of the Paris Agreement, were about forming all the rules. And most of that is done. Not everything, but most of that is done. From now until 2035 is really an implementation game. That's a fundamental way in which COP30 triggers a new era in terms of climate discussions and climate negotiations.
Now, the latest CEEW report shows that only 5% of cooperative climate initiatives have actually achieved their stated goals, while many remain stalled or inactive. Why do you think this accountability gap persists?
Because we have historically rewarded those who make promises rather than those who deliver on promises. And I have argued that the UNFCCC process needs to become a bank of actions, not a bank of commitments. When you make deposits in a bank and those deposits devalue, there is a run on the bank. If you make commitments that you don't fulfill, there'll be a run on this bank as well. Instead, if we shifted focus on who gets things done, who builds partnerships, who takes others along, it's a very different narrative. And that is why we published a report called 10 Years of the Paris Agreement, where we examined more than 475 different initiatives that were launched over the last 10 years. India is the only country from the global south that is at par with the advanced economies in terms of creating coalitions and platforms that bring other countries together. And yet we see only a third of these initiatives exclusively focus on the global south. And we keep arguing that that is where climate action needs to happen. So there is a mismatch between rhetoric of promises that are unmet, rhetoric of expectations from the global south which don't get support, and a lack of recognition of the kinds of efforts that are being made by countries like India to bring the rest of the world together, to create bridges between the North and the South. Think about the International Solar Alliance, the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, the Global Biofuels Alliance. These are all initiatives and platforms that India has created. Think about the Leadership Initiative on Industrial Transition that India and Sweden have forged to look at industrial decarbonization. These are all efforts that are being made beyond the negotiations to say, if we got to implement things, we need partners. We need to offer something. We need to bring others onto the table. And this is a different approach. I call them coalitions of the doing, not just coalitions of the talking. And I think the more we can shine the spotlight on that, your question about accountability will be answered in and of itself.
Now, India has emerged as one of the most proactive players in the global south. What, in your view, sets India's approach apart from other emerging economies?
I think India's approach sets it apart from other developed economies as well, not just emerging economies. Consider this. In 2010, when our national solar mission began, we had less than 20 megawatts of solar. Today, we have over 115,000 megawatts of solar. We have over 240,000 megawatts of non-fossil electricity capacity. This did not happen just because we wished it. I mean, if that were the case, if wishes could make us all millionaires, we would all be billionaires. This happened with intentionality. The first intentionality is setting long-term targets and not withdrawing from them. This is what we are seeing in the United States. This is not what we are seeing in India. There is a commitment to keep ratcheting up our clean energy targets. Secondly, we invested in institutional design. For instance, the Solar Energy Corporation of India served as a bulwark in terms of the risks that project developers on one hand feel whether the utilities, the power utilities will pay them the money, etc. So when you innovate with an institution in between, you sign contracts separately from the project developer, the power generator, and the power utility, and you
Sure.
de-risk. There are other state level transition strategies that have been put in place in that have also further enhanced this approach.
And what are the most strategic areas where Indian diplomacy and innovation can make a tangible global impact?
I think one is that we have to look at innovation that serves the interests of our types of economies. Innovation is a route to development. It's not an end in itself. So when you think about India, where majority of the population, say, is still employed in primary sectors like agriculture, where does the clean energy story fit in? It fits in the form of solar irrigation, for instance. And India has the world's largest program on solar irrigation. Now, what lesson for that from that can go to other countries? In Africa alone, that market could be another $12 billion sort of solar irrigation, because again, the populations are dispersed. It's a very large continent with dispersed population. So extending the grid out everywhere might be difficult, but extending it in a way that you have this distributed network of energy infrastructure that is servicing the needs of smallholder farmers, etc., is innovation that serves a developing country context. Another thing that can happen is actually around supply chains. It is important that the clean energy transition also enables an economic transformation in helping emerging economies and developing economies become part of the new climate economy.
It's time for a quick break here. We'll be back shortly. Stay tuned. Welcome back to IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 13. With COP30 underway, we are sitting down today with Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water and Special Envoy for COP30 South Asia, to break down what COP30 means for innovation, diplomacy and real-world climate solutions. Listen in. So looking beyond COP30, what will define success for you personally and professionally at this COP? What outcomes would make you feel that the world has turned a corner from ambition to implementation?
Number one, I want the perception gap to be filled. There is an ambition gap in terms of how much the world needs to target climate change and how much we are promising to do. There is an implementation gap between what we are promising to do and what we are delivering. I'm talking about the world as a whole. But the real gap is the perception gap, not recognizing that countries like India, countries like Namibia, countries like Uruguay, countries like Vietnam, we are doing a lot more. In some cases, the share of renewable energy in these countries' electricity mixes are sometimes higher than many other advanced economies. I want that perception gap to be filled so that we can have genuine, honest conversations, not paternalistic lecturing. The second thing I would like to see is a recognition that we need internal transformation. India is not acting on climate change because someone else is arm twisting India. India is acting on climate change because it's in our own interest, because we are vulnerable, but we also have the agency to act. We need to demonstrate this through internal transformation, whether it's in more policy signals, whether it is in the livelihoods and the jobs that we create in the millions in the new clean green economy, whether it is in attracting capital and technology into our economy. Third thing I would like to see at COP and beyond COP, strategic bilateralism. We need to forge strategic partnerships, whether with countries in the global south or with countries in the global north, sometimes on sectors, sometimes on issues like adaptation, sometimes on finance. We need to forge these points so that we can identify points of convergence in our mutual interests. And that becomes the basis for smart plurilateralism, smart groupings of, as I said, coalitions of the doing. This is not just a story that will play out in 2 weeks of a COP. For me personally, the whole success story is based on building bridges between India and other countries in the global south, between India and countries in the global north. Uh, the bridge that is too far is not one that is not captured, it is one that is never built. India must take the leadership to keep building bridges when it comes to climate action with its national interests in mind.
From a business and industry perspective, especially for MSMEs and the private sector, how can India channel this climate leadership into opportunities for green innovation and jobs?
We will, at CEW, we consider the green economy to be much, much more than the energy transition alone. In just one state, in Odisha, we have found through analysis of 28 value chains that the green economy, which includes energy, but includes circular economy, includes bioeconomy, includes nature economy, is an opportunity for $42 billion of investment and 1 million jobs in that, additional jobs in that one state alone by 2030. In a few weeks from now, we will release results from our pan-India study on this. All I can say at this stage, we're talking about trillions of dollars of investment opportunity and tens of millions of jobs. So this is the first thing we must recognize, that regardless of what happens in a climate negotiation conference for 2 weeks in a year, there are 50 other weeks in the year
Sure.
when we need to be tapping these opportunities that are presented here in our own economy. Second thing that is extremely critical is we have to become a little bit more comfortable with risk. And what I mean by this is that you can't expect to be a leader in climate action or a leader in climate technology if we are not willing to be a little bit more risk friendly when it comes on taking bets on different technological plays. Some will succeed, some will not succeed. But once we start doing it, once we create a culture which celebrates failure as well, we will truly unleash the entrepreneurial energy of a young population. This means that we need more private venture capital, but it also means we need more de-risking using public capital. The third thing we need to do is make sure that the energy transition comes closer to people, which means that this has to have a focus in our MSME sector, the 40% of our industrial value addition and exports, etc., that comes from this. MSMEs are short on cash, they have thinner profit margins. How do we make sure that we have partial credit guarantees, invoice discounting windows, ring-fence tranches of sovereign green bond proceeds that can be sent towards the MSME sectors, helping them go up the value chain in terms of moving towards the cleaner tech, even if your product is not about clean tech, but cleaner tech in your processes. Finally, I would say that public procurement has a huge role to play here. Think about this. Nearly a fifth of all the steel consumed in the country is public procurement of some kind or the other. Now imagine if we sent a signal that we'll consistently keep demanding and procuring greener and greener steel. It sends a signal to businesses that investing in this area will be a good investment. Take public transport. If every new bus that we procure is going to be electric, it sends a signal to change the assembly lines. If we say our fleet services are going to be electrified, changes a signal to the kinds of businesses that emerge. If we say that we are going to procure sustainably grown food for our midday meal schemes, it sends a signal to shift towards millets and a much, much more diversity on our plates and supporting the smallholder farmers that might not have access to canal irrigation. So when we start thinking about this from the point of view of people, from the point of view of small businesses and their prosperity, And of course, from the point of view of the planet, but not in a feel good way, but where our pathways are consistent with planetary integrity, it immediately opens up a whole world of opportunities in the green economy. As I said, in the trillions of dollars of potential investment and the tens of millions of jobs that can be created.
Now, finance, technology, and capacity building continue to be sticking points for developing nations. Tell us finally, what steps or new mechanisms are we seeing at COP30 to address these?
Well, it's not a mechanism, but it's a roadmap. There is a Baku to Belen roadmap of how do $300 billion get leveraged to get to $1.3 trillion. Uh, there are all sorts of submissions and ideas that have been put in place. We at CEW ourselves have written a lot around this, new kinds of de-risking platforms that are needed, programmatic de-risking, so that you're not just spending a lot of time and transaction cost on project by project de-risking, but programmatic sectoral de-risking, geography-wide de-risking. I would say, without getting into the weeds of this, let's think about three mantras. One, climate finance to climate investment. Two, technology transfer to technology co-development. Three, capacity building to building institutions. If we can follow these three mantras, we then start focusing on not just the piddly amounts of climate finance, but the much larger volumes of climate investment that we can attract in our economies. We don't just wait with a bowl for technology to be transferred, but we say we want to co-create, co-develop, co-invest in the technologies of the future. We don't just do capacity building training exercises, but we say we build institutions that will outlast governments, that will outlast firms. We create an ecosystem where the financial ecosystem, the political ecosystem, the administrative ecosystem, and the entrepreneurial ecosystem sees the opportunity that is greater than the sum of the parts. I always ask my colleagues, for every policy recommendation we make, are we willing to put our own personal savings into a sector? Until we have not answered that question, we have not done our job.
Right.
That is the question policymakers should ask. That is the question entrepreneurs should ask. That is the question academics and analysts should ask. That is the question negotiators should ask. Everything else is a step towards a mantra of jobs growth and sustainability. Get our North Stars right, I think the world is our oyster and we can create our pearls.
Well, it was a pleasure chatting with you, Dr. Ghosh. Thank you so much for taking out the time to speak to us today.
Thank you so much, Ritwika.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of IDFC First Bank Presents Leaders of Tomorrow Season 13. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.